The house smelled like her mother. That was the worst part. Not the peeling wallpaper, or the kitchen faucet dripping its same tired rhythm after 10 years. Not the dead garden out back, or the mailbox stuffed with flyers addressed to a woman who would never read them again. The smell. Lavender and something burnt underneath, like a candle left too long. Like a woman who tried too hard to cover up the smoke. Mara set her bag on the hallway floor and stood still. The real estate agent had said to take her time. Walk through it, feel the space, decide what stays and what goes. She had spoken the way people speak to someone standing next to a grave. Careful, practiced, a voice wrapped in cotton wool. Mara had nodded and smiled and waited for the woman to leave, so she could stop pretending her face worked normally. The hallway stretched ahead of her, narrow and dark, the same faded runner carpet she had walked across 10,000 times as a kid. She remembered sliding on it in her socks when she was 6, crashing into the wall at the end, and her mother standing in the kitchen doorway, dish towel over her shoulder, shaking her head with that expression, half angry, half trying not to laugh. Mara did not slide in her socks now. She walked through the kitchen first because it was the easiest room. Easiest meaning it held the fewest ghosts. The counters were clean. The fridge hummed. Inside she found a jar of pickles, a half-empty bottle of mustard, and a block of cheese that had turned into something a science teacher might bring to class. She closed the fridge, opened it again, closed it. Her hand stayed on the handle like it was holding onto a railing on a boat that was tipping. The living room was harder. Her mother's chair sat in its usual spot by the window, a green thing with worn arms that had molded over the years into the exact shape of one woman's body. A blanket was folded on the seat. A mug sat on the table beside it, still holding the dry ghost of tea at the bottom. Mara picked up the mug. She turned it in her hands. It said, "World's Okayest Mom," in faded letters. A gift Mara had bought at a gas station when she was 14 because she thought it was funny, and because she did not know yet how to say what she actually meant. She put the mug back down, carefully, like it was made of something that could shatter the room if it hit the floor. Upstairs was off limits. She had decided that in the car. Upstairs was her old bedroom, her mother's bedroom, the bathroom where she had stood at 16, staring at the mirror and hating every square inch of the face that stared back. Upstairs could wait. Upstairs could wait forever. The basement, though, she had not planned to go to the basement. The basement was just storage. Old furniture, holiday decorations her mother never threw away, boxes of things that no one wanted, but no one could part with. Every house has a room like that. A place where objects go to be forgotten while still technically existing. But the real estate agent had mentioned it. There's some water damage down there, you'll want to check. And Mara, who had driven 400 miles and slept in a motel that smelled like cleaning products and regret, figured she might as well look. The basement door stuck the way it always had. She pulled hard and it gave with a sound like a small bone popping. The stairs were steep and unlit, and she used the flashlight on her phone, the beam swinging across concrete walls and dust. It was smaller than she remembered. That was the thing about returning to places from childhood. Everything shrank. The ceiling was low enough that she had to duck slightly, and she was not tall. Boxes lined the walls. Old Christmas lights were tangled in a heap in the corner, like a pile of dead snakes. There was a table saw her mother had never used. A gift from some man who had come and gone before Mara turned 7. The water damage was real. One wall had a dark stain spreading across it like a bruise, and the boxes nearest to it were soft and swollen. She pulled one away from the wall, and it tore apart in her hands, spilling its guts across the floor. Old papers, envelopes, photographs. She knelt down. Most of it was junk. Electricity bills from 2004, a receipt for a washing machine, a birthday card, from someone named Dolores, who Mara did not remember. But underneath the junk, stacked neatly and held together with a rubber band that snapped the moment she touched it, were letters. Dozens of them, all addressed to her. Mara sat back on her heels. The concrete was cold through her jeans. The handwriting was unfamiliar, tight and careful, the kind that belonged to someone who did not write often, but tried hard when they did. The return address was a town she had never heard of. The postmark was from 1998. She would have been 8. She opened it. "Dear Mara," it began, "I know you don't know who I am. Your mother and I decided it was better that way, but I think about you every day, and I hope one day you will read this and understand why I couldn't be there." She stopped reading. Her hands were doing something she could not control. Shaking, but not the way hands shake when you are cold. More like the way a glass vibrates on a table when a train passes underneath. Something enormous moving through her, invisible, underground. She looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. Your father, Daniel. Her father who had died in a car accident when she was 3. Her father whose grave she had visited every year on his birthday. Standing beside her mother, placing flowers on a stone that bore his name and 2 dates. Her father who she had mourned like a missing limb her entire life. Her father who apparently could write letters from the dead. Mara sat on the cold basement floor of her mother's house and held the letter and stared at it until the words blurred and reformed and blurred again. The faucet upstairs was still dripping. She could hear it through the ceiling, steady and unconcerned. Drip, 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 like the house had a heartbeat that did not care what she had just found. She picked up another letter, and another. They spanned years, 1997 to 2012. 15 years of letters, addressed to a girl whose mother had told her that her father was dead and buried. A girl who had stood at a grave every April and talked to dirt. She pressed her palms flat against the concrete floor and felt the cold seep into her skin. She thought about the mug upstairs. World's okayest mom. She thought about the grave. She thought about how her mother had held her hand at that grave every single year and said nothing. Not a twitch, not a crack, just a woman and her daughter, and a stone and a lie so big it had its own plot of land. The faucet dripped. Mara gathered the letters into a pile, neat and careful, the way you handle something that might be a bomb, or might be a gift, and you cannot yet tell which. She carried them upstairs. She sat in her mother's chair. She turned on the lamp. The letters were not love letters. That was important. Mara had expected, or maybe feared, some kind of weeping confession. A man pouring his broken heart across pages like a character in a film, begging her to understand, begging her to forgive. They were not that. They were quiet things, small reports from a life she had never been invited to witness. The first one, from 1997, was short. Daniel wrote about the weather in his town. He wrote about a dog he had adopted, a mutt with one ear that flopped and one that stood straight up, and how the dog liked to sleep on his feet while he watched television. He wrote that he hoped she was doing well in school. He wrote that he had heard she liked to draw, and that he was not good at drawing, but he had tried to sketch the dog for her, and he was including the sketch so she could see. Mara turned the letter over. No sketch. Her mother must have removed it. Or it had been lost. Or her mother had kept it somewhere else. Some other box. Some other hiding place in this house of secrets. The second letter was from 3 months later. Daniel mentioned that he had started a job at a hardware store. He described the way the store smelled. Sawdust and metal and the kind of cold that only unheated buildings have in November. He asked if she still liked peanut butter sandwiches because he remembered that she used to eat them for every meal when she was 2, and he had always worried she would turn into one. The joke was bad. Dad joke bad. The kind of bad that made Mara's throat close up. She read the third letter, and the fourth, and the fifth. They came in a slow stream, every 2 or 3 months, each one a little window opened onto a life that existed in parallel to hers, running alongside it like a second set of railroad tracks, close enough to see, but never touching. Daniel got promoted at the hardware store. Daniel's dog had puppies, even though the vet had said the dog was male, which Daniel said was either a miracle or a serious conversation he needed to have with his veterinarian. Daniel moved to a new apartment. Daniel started going to church, not because he found God, but because the church had a free breakfast on Sundays, and he was, in his words, a man of simple priorities. He never asked why she did not write back. That was the thing that sat in Mara's chest like a stone she could not swallow. Every letter ended the same way. I hope you're doing good. I think about you, your father, Daniel. And not once, in 15 years of letters, did he say, why haven't you answered? Not once did he accuse her of silence. He just kept writing. Year after year, letter after letter, like a man throwing messages into the sea, not expecting a bottle to come back, but unable to stop throwing. By the 7th letter, Mara was not sitting in the chair anymore. She was on the floor. The lamp above her cast a yellow circle around her body, like she was evidence at a crime scene. The letters were spread out in front of her in a half-moon shape, arranged by date, because her brain did that when it could not process what was happening. It organized. It sorted. It built neat little rows of paper while everything behind her eyes turned to water. The 2003 letter mentioned her by age. You must be 13 now, Daniel wrote. I hear 13 is the worst age. It was for me. Everything was too loud and too bright, and I wanted to fight everyone and everything, especially myself. If you are feeling that way, I want you to know it gets better. Not right away, but it does. She had been 13 in 2003. She had been 13 and fighting with her mother about everything. Clothes, curfew, the color of her bedroom walls. She had been 13 and sneaking cigarettes behind the gas station with a girl named Chloe, who told her that smoking was the only thing that made the world shut up for 5 minutes. She had been 13 and angry at a dead father for dying. Except he had not died. He had been alive, writing her letters about a one-eared dog and a hardware store and church breakfasts. And she had been standing at his grave, talking to an empty box. Mara pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes until she saw colors, red and white and a green that pulsed. She did not cry. Crying would mean something had landed, and nothing had landed yet. Everything was still falling. The 2006 letter was different. Daniel's handwriting had changed. Looser, less careful, the letters leaning to the right like they were tired. He wrote that he had been sick. He wrote that being sick had made him think about things he usually did not let himself think about, and that one of those things was whether he had made the right choice all those years ago. Your mother and I agreed, he wrote. We agreed it was better for you. I still believe that most days. But some days, Mara, I don't believe anything at all. It was the first time a letter felt like it had blood in it. Mara put it down. She looked at the wall. A framed photo hung there. Her and her mother at the county fair. Mara maybe 10 years old, holding a stuffed bear she had won at the ring toss, grinning with a gap where her front tooth used to be. Her mother stood behind her, hands on Mara's shoulders, smiling the kind of smile that Mara had always thought meant happiness. She looked at her mother's eyes in the photo. They did not look happy. They looked like a door being held shut from the inside. The letters continued. 2007, 2008. Daniel got better from whatever had made him sick. He moved again to a town closer to, and here Mara's breath caught, closer to where Mara lived. Not the same town. 2 towns over, 40 minutes on the highway. He had been 40 minutes away. For years. While she went to high school, while she graduated, while she packed her bags and left for the city, and never looked back. He had been 40 minutes away in a town called Millbrook, working at a hardware store, going to church for the free eggs, writing letters to a daughter who he thought had chosen not to respond. The last letter was from 2012. It was the shortest one, just a few lines. Dear Mara, I don't know if you read these. I don't know if your mother gives them to you. I have thought about that for a long time, and I don't have an answer. I am going to stop writing after this one, not because I want to. Because I think maybe the kindest thing I can do is let you live your life without a ghost knocking on the door every few months. If you ever want to find me, I am easy to find. I am not hiding. I never was. Love, your father, Daniel. Mara folded the letter. She pressed it flat against her knee. The lamp buzzed. The faucet dripped. The house breathed its lavender and smoke breath around her. She reached for her phone. She typed Daniel Kovac Millbrook into the search bar, with thumbs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Some other woman, sitting on some other floor, having some other life fall apart. A phone number came up. A white pages listing, the kind that still exists for people who live in small towns and have nothing to hide. She stared at the number. She did not call. Instead, she stood up, walked to the kitchen, and opened the fridge. The cheese was still there, green and alien and terrible. She threw the pickles in after it. She wiped the shelf with a paper towel. She cleaned the shelf next to it. She cleaned the whole fridge, every shelf, every drawer, top to bottom, scrubbing at stains that had been there longer than she had been alive, working until her fingers were red, and the fridge was empty and gleaming, and the house smelled less like her mother and more like lemon cleaner. Then she sat back down in her mother's chair, picked up the stack of letters, and began to read them all again, from the beginning. The town had one diner, same as it always had, a flat building with a tin roof and a sign that read Dottie's, even though a man named Phil had owned it for the last 20 years, and had never bothered to change the name, because the sign still worked, and Phil was not a man who fixed things that still worked. Mara sat in a booth by the window. The table was sticky. The coffee was terrible. The waitress was a woman about her age with a ponytail and tired eyes, who said, "What'll it be, hun?" without looking up from her notepad, and Mara ordered eggs, because eggs were simple and she needed something simple. She was not here for the eggs. She was here because Carol Moran came to this diner every morning at 8:30, and had done so for the past 30 years, and it was now 8:25, and Mara was going to sit here with her terrible coffee and wait. Carol Moran was her mother's best friend, had been her mother's best friend. Mara was still adjusting to the past tense. Carol had been at the funeral, standing in the second row, in a black dress and a hat that looked like it had been borrowed from a much older woman, crying in that silent, jaw-clenched way that people cry when they are trying to hold their faces together. Carol had known everything about Mara's mother. Everything. At 8:32, the door opened, and Carol walked in. She was smaller than Mara remembered, though that might have been the same trick every childhood place pulled, shrinking things down to their true size. Her hair was gray now, cut short, and she moved with the careful steps of a woman whose knees had opinions about stairs. She saw Mara and stopped. The stop lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. But Mara counted them, because inside those seconds she watched something cross Carol's face. A flash, quick and bright, like a fish turning just below the surface of a lake. And behind it, fear. "Well," Carol said. She slid into the opposite side of the booth without being invited. "I figured you'd come find me." "How are you, Carol?" "Oh, you know, alive, which is more than some of us can say." She picked up the menu, looked at it, put it down. She had not read a word. "You look like her." "So I've been told." "Not a compliment. Your mother looked like a woman carrying a piano up a hill." Always, even when she was laughing. Carol waved at the waitress. The usual, Jess. Then to Mara, with the air of someone ripping off a bandage, "You found the letters." Mara's coffee cup was halfway to her mouth. She set it down. "I told her to burn them," Carol said. "I told her 100 times, Helen, burn the damn letters. But your mother she couldn't. She kept everything. Birthday cards, grocery lists, receipts from places that closed in the 90s. She kept it all. I told her it was going to catch up to her one day. And she told me to mind my own business, which was fair, I suppose. Except, your business was always my business, because I loved you both, and that is a complicated thing to do when one of you is lying to the other." Carol delivered this speech without pausing for breath, the way a woman delivers a speech she has practiced in her head for years. Mara said nothing. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. It was warm and solid, and it was the only thing in this diner that was not moving. "He's alive," Mara said. "Yes. He's been alive the whole time. Yes. The grave." Carol closed her eyes, just for a moment. When she opened them, they were wet, but her voice was dry. "Your mother bought the plot and the stone. I went with her. She paid cash." The man at the funeral home did not ask questions, because people were not in the habit of asking Helen Kovac questions she did not want to answer. "There's nothing in it. There is a box, a small one. She put some of his things in it, a watch, a shirt, a photo. She said she needed something in the ground, or it would not feel real." Carol paused. I think she meant it would not feel real to her. She needed the grave to believe her own story. Mara's eggs arrived. She looked at them. 2 eggs sunny side up, staring back at her like a pair of yarrow eyes. She picked up her fork and put it down. "Why?" she said. Carol took a long breath. "Your father was not a bad man. I want you to know that first, because whatever you're building in your head right now, whatever villain you're drawing, erase it. Daniel was not a bad man. He was a broken one. There is a difference, and the difference matters." "Why, Carol? Or maybe you don't. Your mother scrubbed him clean after the story started. But he drank. Not every day, not even every week. But when he did, he disappeared. Not angry drunk, not violent drunk, gone drunk. He would vanish for days, come back looking like he'd been sleeping in the woods, because he had been sleeping in the woods. And one time, Mara, he vanished, and you were 3 years old, and your mother couldn't find you." The diner was loud around them. Someone was laughing at the counter. Plates were clinking. The world was doing its ordinary business on all sides, while Carol Moran sat across from her and dismantled 27 years of reality with the careful, steady hands of a woman defusing the bomb she had helped to build. "She found you. You were fine. You were in your room playing with blocks. But the front door was open, and you were 3, and he was supposed to be watching you, and he was gone. She didn't know for how long. She didn't know if the door had been open 5 minutes or 5 hours. So she killed him." Carol flinched. "That's a hard way to say it. What's the soft way?" She gave him a choice. Leave and stay gone. Or she would make it so you would never look for him. She didn't want you growing up waiting for a man who disappeared. She didn't want you at the window every night wondering if tonight was the night he came home, or the night he didn't. She wanted clean. She wanted done. And Daniel. Carol's voice cracked, the first crack, small but deep. Daniel agreed, because he was afraid she was right. Mara looked at her eggs. The yolks were starting to firm up, the yellow going pale at the edges. She thought about a 3-year-old girl sitting on the floor building a tower of blocks, while the front door stood open to whatever might walk in. "He wrote me letters. I know. For 15 years. I know. She never gave them to me. No. You knew. Yes." Mara picked up her fork. She broke both yolks. Yellow bled across the plate, slow and bright, running into the toast, soaking the edges. She watched it spread. "He's in Millbrook," she said. 40 minutes away." Carol nodded. "How long has he been there?" "Since 2007, maybe 2008. He wanted to be close, not too close, close enough." "Close enough for what?" Carol looked out the window. The parking lot was mostly empty. A truck idled near the road, its driver doing something on his phone. The morning was gray and flat, the kind of sky that could not decide if it was going to rain or just threaten. "In case you ever came looking," Carol said. Mara put money on the table. She had not eaten the eggs. She stood up, and her body felt like it was made of a material she did not recognize. Not heavy, not light, just wrong. Like she was wearing someone else's bones. "Mara." She stopped. "Your mother loved you. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it might make it worse. But she did. In her wrong, stupid, stubborn way, she loved you more than she loved being a good person." Mara walked out of the diner. The door swung shut behind her. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 11 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, her hands at 10 and 2, going nowhere. Then she typed the address into her phone and pulled onto the road toward Millbrook. Millbrook was the kind of town that existed because someone had built a gas station, and then other people had built things around it. And then everyone had agreed to call it a town, even though it was really just a gas station with ambition. One main road, a hardware store, a church with a white steeple, a bar called The Pint that had a neon sign missing its T, so it just said The Pin. And nobody had fixed it because the people of Millbrook, apparently, shared Phil's philosophy about things that still mostly worked. Mara drove through it in under 2 minutes. She turned around at the far end and drove through it again, slower this time, like she was casing the place. Looking for what? She did not know. A sign, a feeling, a man standing on a porch, holding a one-eared dog and a letter, waiting. Nobody was standing on any porch. The hardware store was on the main road, a brown building with a flat roof and a hand-painted sign that said Millbrook Hardware and Supply in letters that were not quite straight, as if the painter had been working on a windy day or a second beer. Mara parked across the street. She did not get out. She sat in the car and stared at the building through her windshield, the way a person stares at the ocean before swimming in cold water, knowing that the hard part is not the swimming, but the first step in. A man came out of the hardware store, carrying a bag. He was old, bald, wearing a coat too heavy for the weather. Not Daniel. Mara did not know what Daniel looked like, but she knew he was not this man, because this man moved like he had been old his entire life. And Daniel, in her mind, still moved like the handwriting in his early letters, careful, upright, trying. She got out of the car. The hardware store smelled the way Daniel had described it, sawdust and metal and cold. The shelves were tall and packed with things Mara could not name, brackets and washers and bolts, and tools that looked like they belonged in a surgeon's kit or a torture chamber, depending on your frame of mind. A radio somewhere played a country song about a truck and a woman, which Mara figured covered about 80% of all country songs ever written. There was a man behind the counter. He was reading a newspaper, an actual newspaper, the large kind that you have to fold and fight with, the kind that leaves ink on your fingers. He was around 60, thin. His hair was gray and cut short, and he wore glasses that sat low on his nose, and a flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves. His forearms were tan and ropey, the arms of a man who had spent decades lifting things and putting them down. Mara stood at the end of an aisle of nails and looked at him. She could see it. In the way his mouth sat, slightly crooked, tilted to the left, as if one side of his face was always about to smile, and the other side had not been told yet. She had that same mouth. She had looked at it in every mirror since she was old enough to notice it was uneven, and had always assumed it came from her mother, because everything, she had been told, came from her mother. He looked up. His eyes went to her face and stayed there. The newspaper lowered an inch, then another. Then it was on the counter, and his hands were on top of it, and he was very still. The kind of still that animals go when they hear a sound they cannot identify and do not yet know if it means safety or danger. "Can I help you?" he said. His voice was quiet, not shy, controlled. The voice of a man who had learned a long time ago to keep his volume low, because volume had once been a problem. Mara opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She looked at a shelf of sandpaper to her left. Different grains, she noticed, coarse and medium and fine, labeled with numbers she did not understand. She picked one up. 80 grit. She had no idea what that meant. She held it like it was a ticket to a show she had paid for, and was now afraid to attend. 80 grits for rough work, he said. Stripping paint, sanding down raw wood. If you need something smoother, you want 120 or higher. I don't need sandpaper, she said. Okay. He did not push. He waited. He was a man who was used to waiting. My name is Mara. The sound that came out of him was not a word. It was something smaller and bigger than a word at the same time. A breath that carried weight. An exhale that had been held for years and did not know how to come out in any shape that language could hold. His hand went to the counter, like he needed to check it was still solid. His fingers pressed flat against the surface, and Mara watched the color leave his knuckles. I found the letters, she said. He took off his glasses, folded them, put them on the counter next to the newspaper. He did all of this with the slow precision of a man who was building a wall around himself, one small action at a time, brick by brick, glasses and newspaper and the counter between them. Anything to give him a second longer before whatever was about to happen. I thought she threw them out, he said. She kept them, in the basement. He nodded. He pressed his lips together, and the crooked mouth went straight for the first time, and Mara saw what his face looked like when he was trying not to fall apart. And it looked exactly like her face when she was trying not to fall apart. And that symmetry, that mirror, that proof written in muscle and bone, that was the thing that broke the surface. I visited your grave, she said, every year. April 12th. My birthday, he said. I know. He came around the counter. He moved slowly, not because he was careful, but because his legs did not seem to be fully cooperating with the idea of walking. He stopped about 6 feet from her, close enough to see, far enough to run. The distance of a man who had been told a long time ago that his closeness was dangerous, and had believed it ever since. Mara looked at his face. She catalogued it the way she catalogued the letters, sorting, organizing, trying to build order out of wreckage. His eyes were brown. Hers were brown. His nose had a bump on the bridge where it had been broken at some point. His hands, hanging at his sides, were large and scarred in small places, nicked by years of hardware and tools and the sharp edges of a practical life. She wanted to hit him. She wanted to ask him 1,000 questions, and she wanted to walk out the door and drive 400 miles and never come back. All of these desires existed in her body at the same time, pulling in 4 directions, and the result was that she stood perfectly still in a hardware store in Millbrook, holding a sheet of 80 grit sandpaper, and said nothing. You look like her, he said. Carol said I look like her too. Carol. He almost smiled. Carol Moran. She's still at the diner every morning? 8:32. She was always late. 2 minutes, every time. Your mother used to say Carol would be 2 minutes late to her own funeral. He stopped. The almost smile folded back into something else. She told you. She told me some. I want to hear the rest from you. He nodded again. He looked at the door, then back at her. I close at 5. It's 10 in the morning. I know. He picked up his glasses, put them back on, went around the counter. picked up the newspaper, folded it, and set it aside like he was putting away a version of himself that was no longer needed. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a small cardboard sign that said, "Back in 15 minutes," and walked to the front door and hung it on the handle and locked the door. He turned around. "I don't have 15 minutes worth of story," he said. "I have 27 years worth. So that sign is a lie. But it's a hardware store in Millbrook, and nobody's buying anything today anyway." He pulled a stool out from behind the counter and set another one in front of it. He sat on one and gestured to the other. Mara put the sandpaper down. She sat, and Daniel began. He started with the door. Not the leaving, not the agreement, not the conversation where Helen had stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed and given him two choices, both of which ended the same way. He started with the door, the front door of the house on Beckett Road, the one that had been open when Helen came home, the one that Mara, 3 years old, could have walked through and into the road and into a story that ended differently. "I had been gone 2 days," Daniel said. He sat on the stool with his hands on his knees, the posture of a man in a waiting room. "I don't remember where I went. That was the thing about those times. I didn't go somewhere. I went nowhere. I disappeared into the kind of dark that doesn't have a location, just a wait. And when I came back, the only thing I could tell anyone was that I had been gone, and that I was sorry, and that it wouldn't happen again." He looked at the floor between his boots. "It always happened again." Mara sat across from him and listened. She held her hands in her lap, fingers woven together, the way she sat in meetings at work when she needed to look calm while something inside her was eating its way through the walls. "Your mother found you in your room, playing, happy. You didn't know anything was wrong. The door was open, but you hadn't gone through it. You were building a tower." He paused. "She told me it was blocks, a tower of blocks. And when she walked in, you looked up and said, 'Mama, look how big.' And she picked you up and held you, and she decided that you were dead, that I was better off dead. That a dead father was something a child could grieve and move past, but a father who kept leaving was a wound that would never close." He rubbed his thumb across his knuckle, a small circular motion, automatic. "She wasn't wrong. She wasn't right either." "No," he said, "she wasn't right either." The hardware store was quiet around them. The radio had moved on to a different song, something slower, a woman's voice singing about rain. The fluorescent lights above them buzzed the way fluorescent lights always buzz, a sound that lives just below the level of noticing until everything else goes silent, and there it is, constant and mindless as a heartbeat. Daniel told her about the agreement. Helen had drawn it up herself. No lawyers, just 2 pages written in her neat handwriting on yellow legal paper. He would leave. He would not contact Mara. Helen would tell Mara he had died. If he fought it, Helen would file for full custody and submit evidence of his drinking and his disappearances, and he would lose anyway. But it would be slow and public, and Mara would be old enough by the end of it to understand some of what was happening. And the understanding would be worse than the lie. "So, I signed it," Daniel said. "At the kitchen table. You were asleep upstairs. I could hear the little machine you had, the sound machine, the one that played ocean waves. I could hear the fake ocean through the ceiling while I signed a piece of paper that made me not your father anymore." Mara's jaw was tight. She could feel her teeth pressing together, a dull ache spreading up toward her temples. The anger was there, the same anger that had risen in the diner with Carol, but now it had nowhere to point. It turned in circles inside her, like a dog looking for a place to lie down. "I moved to a town 3 hours north. I got sober. That took a year, and most of my dignity. I got a job. I started writing the letters because I couldn't not write them. I knew she might never give them to you. I knew they might go straight into the trash. But I needed there to be a record, something outside my own head that proved I had existed as your father, even after I stopped being allowed to be one. You could have come back, Mara said. You could have ignored the agreement. It wasn't legal. No court signed it. No. So why? He looked at her. His eyes behind the glasses were the same brown as hers, but older, in a way that had nothing to do with age. They looked like eyes that had stared at a ceiling at 3 a.m. for a decade and a half, running the same calculation over and over, always arriving at the same answer. Because she was right about one thing. I was a man who disappeared, and a man who disappears should not be in charge of a child. I got sober, yes, but I didn't trust it. I didn't trust myself, and I was afraid that if I came back and then vanished again, if you opened that door and let me in, and then I walked through a different door the way I always had, that would be worse than a grave. A grave stays put. A grave doesn't leave. The woman on the radio finished her song about rain. A commercial came on. Someone was selling truck insurance. The world kept doing its job. Mara stood up. She walked down the aisle of nails and bolts and brackets, the aisle of small metal things with specific purposes, things that held other things together. She reached the end of the aisle and stood there, looking at a wall of hinges, cabinet hinges, door hinges, gate hinges, and she thought about how a hinge is just a small piece of metal that allows a thing to open and close and open and close, and how that was the simplest and most necessary invention anyone had ever come up with, and how she was standing in a hardware store crying over hinges, and that was going to be a difficult thing to explain to anyone for the rest of her life. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She walked back. He sat on his stool and watched her come back with the expression of a man watching weather, something he could see but could not control. Something that would do what it was going to do, regardless of whether he was ready. I don't forgive you, she said. I know. I don't forgive her either. I know. I'm angry at both of you, and I don't know how to be angry at a dead woman and a stranger at the same time, because those are two completely different kinds of angry, and they don't fit together. No, he said, they don't. She sat back down on the stool. She looked at the back in 15 minutes sign hanging on the locked door. It's been 45 minutes, she said. Nobody's knocking. She almost laughed. It came up from somewhere low and unexpected, a bubble of something that was not joy, but was in the same neighborhood, the kind of sound that escapes before you can decide whether to let it out. It lasted half a second, and then it was gone. The dog, she said, the one with the ears. Ruby. What happened to her? She lived to be 14, that's 98 in dog years, which I told everyone at her funeral, which was attended by me and the veterinarian who had once told me she was a boy. Mara pressed her lips together. The crooked mouth again, his mouth on her face, doing the same thing. I want to see you again, she said. I'm not saying I want a father. I don't know what I want. But I'm selling the house, and I have a week, and I don't want to spend the whole week alone in that house, with her smell, and her chair, and a grave I can't look at anymore. Daniel nodded. He reached under the counter and pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. He wrote something down, his phone number, his address, and slid it across to her. His handwriting was the same as the letters, tight and careful. A man who tried hard when he wrote. Mara took the paper. She folded it and put it in her pocket. She stood up. She walked to the door. She unlocked it and took the sign down and set it on the counter. 80 grit, she said, turning back. You said that's for rough work. Stripping things down, he said, getting to the raw surface underneath. She looked at him. He looked at her. Sounds about right, she said. She walked out of the hardware store and into the gray morning of Millbrook and sat in her car and put her hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. The paper with his number was in her pocket, warm against her leg. The road back to Beckett was 40 minutes long. The house would be there when she arrived, with its dripping faucet and its empty fridge and its basement full of ghosts she had already dragged into the light. She started the car. She did not drive toward Beckett Road. She drove to the church at the end of the main street, the one with the white steeple, the one Daniel had gone to for the free breakfast. She parked in the empty lot and sat there looking at the building. It was small and plain and needed a coat of paint. A bulletin board near the door advertised a bake sale from 3 weeks ago. A bird sat on the steeple and did not move. Mara sat in the parking lot of the church where her father had eaten free eggs on Sundays and stared at the building where he had quietly, without telling anyone, kept himself alive week after week, in a town 40 minutes from a daughter who thought he was underground. She did not go inside. She sat there a long time. Then she drove back to Beckett Road, walked into the house, sat in her mother's chair, and picked up the phone.